How is it that even with the best of intentions, when we enter into a relationship and fall in love, we aim to embark on a journey together as our highest self and to create the relationship that is not only checking our boxes, but is, in some cases, transcendental, only to find ourselves digging through the muck of our shadow patterns or our projections, being disillusioned that the person that we saw doesn't exist except in our own minds, hopes, and wishful dreams. When we try to make people into something that they're not, this is often futile and is the foundation for a lot of breakups. When people realize and they finally come to the deep understanding that the person that they picked isn't who they thought that they were, because they were examining sometimes a mirror image of themselves, other times a purposeful and intentional illusion, and yet other times an illusion of their own minds. But there are other relationships that make it past that phase, where past the limerence, past the infatuation, they start to see the other person, wounds, patterns, all of the dirt and the yuck, and even sometimes an ick, and they love them anyway. But something still happens where the behavior paradigms that one or both partners subscribe to actually make the relationship non-functional. And these can be particularly painful because there can be this yearning and sadness and desire because you actually do see the person. You do know them, sometimes better than they might even know themselves at first. As you reflect back parts of their shadow and recesses of their inner psyche that are buried underneath their conscious mind. And like a beam of light, your love illuminates aspects to them that have either been lost or buried, like finding treasure. And it can be very satisfying to be in these relationships, especially when there is a soul contract, because you know that no matter what happens, or even what the person says or does, you know how they really feel about you. And you know how you feel about them. And there is an unconditional, unbreakable bond, a loyalty that doesn't quite capture normal relationship loyalties. But unfortunately, the lifestyles or the choices and how a person builds a relationship or constructs their life isn't actually a match for you. This is what I call the 3D, 5D disconnect. And that is when people are still living in a three-dimensional reality, which is very dualistic and characterized by polarities and being of the flesh and material pursuits, sometimes prestige or opportunities. There are choices that we all make when we build a three-dimensional life. And some people value different things than their partners. And so the lifestyle that they want to embark on and the sacrifices that they aim to make in order to do so can be outright incompatible. They can also need to fit themselves into certain cultures and subcultures. And those cultures and subcultures may actually be at odds with the interest and personality of the other partner. And yet, at the 5-dimensional level, meaning beyond just the 3-dimensional world, there is this deep understanding that despite all of the contradictions and how one person or both might be showing up in their reality, they know the truth. They feel it. They breathe it. And there is no question. But it is a matter of the 3D and the 5D coming into union. And that is where the question is. And sometimes, as I have personally experienced, there's not a way to merge those worlds. And so partners have to say, bon voyage. I'll see you on the other side. There is an aspect of love which requires not only a thoughtfulness, but a cohesion of worlds, of intent, of priorities, and of patterns. And there are some people that are still lost in their unconscious, subconscious patterns and are privy to their wounds being activated all over again when they meet just the right person. What I have found is that very often, particularly in soul contracts, there will be magnetism as both people share complementary wounds or patterns. So the way that this could show up is it could be in polarization of attachment styles. There could be an anxious partner, and the other one could be avoidant. And they're actually wanting similar things, but the way that they approach relationships is very different. One wants zero space, and the other wants a lot of space. One wants enmeshment, and the other is afraid of exactly that and engulfment. And so, like two people pulling on a rope, like tug of war, there's this push and pull dynamic. At the root of it, what you'll find is that they're often afraid of similar things, and they have complementary childhood wounds that fit together like puzzle pieces. And their relationship is incredibly challenging, but also very fulfilling, depending on the pairing. And from the outset, when they start on this journey, they might not realize where it is going to end, which is often in cyclical patterns of off and on again, and pain and heightened ecstasy as they reunite. And then they realize that the underlying pattern isn't really resolved. So, and it's off to the races again. I've actually worked with partners that have been doing this for decades as some of my coaching clients, literally for decades. And there is a rhythm to each of these unions where eventually one of the partners will start to plan their exit. And when they plan their exit, the other one pulls them back. And then they're right back at it again. Over and over and over and over and over and over. Sometimes perhaps for lifetimes. These patterns, shadow patterns, as I like to call them, get in the way of the highest expression of love because they're often rooted in fear, control, and being afraid of rejection, abandonment. This is all part of the fear umbrella. And other traits as well. It's actually quite varied. And there are other attachment styles. It's not just about the anxious and avoidant. There's even the disorganized or the fearful avoidant attachment. And they're a mix of both. Quite complicated psychology, usually coming from very, very traumatic, neglectful, or abusive upbringings, but not always. And what you find is that they create very chaotic bonds where they're often frightened to have feelings at all, much less reveal them to somebody that they're interested in, unless they feel that the other person falls first. And so they will test them and probe them and examine the relationship, all while holding themselves back until they are convinced that it is safe. And this is when the trouble starts. This is when the chaotic part of the relationship starts, because when they start to reveal themselves, they are often quite frightened at the response that they receive in return. If there's any delay, or if the tone is not right, or if the delivery is a little off or a little suspect in their opinion, nobody else's opinion, then this can cause a recoil effect in them where they will shut down or run away or pretend that they were just joking the entire time. It can also manifest in other ways. And this starts this very rocky onboarding on a relationship journey with somebody that's fearful, avoidant, or disorganized, or ambivalent, avoidant. Because whenever they are triggered and they happen to be very hypersensitive, they will suddenly turn cold. Sometimes they'll even be cruel. They might even leave. They might even pursue other people. They might even triangulate and pursue other people that their love interest can see or knows about. Is almost this, well, if you really want me, you have to come and get me, and you're going to have to compete for me too. And the problem with these activations of the fearful avoidant is that their mind is very, very active. So much so that they can be very hypersensitive, even to criticism, rejection, betrayal. So they might be flirtatious, but God forbid you make eyes at somebody, even when you're not even interested in them. They're very perceptive and they can read a lot into social dynamics. Some of them are very skilled socially, so they can read energy and subconscious intent of people because they developed it as a survival skill. They had to. As a result, they can pick up on signs and subtle signals that their partners are interested in other people, are attracted to other people. And just the mere observation of this can send them into a tailspin. But because they're not always keen on being forthcoming about what they're experiencing, because remember, they hide their feelings. Some even invalidate themselves, or they pretend that they don't have them. And they try very hard, just like dismissive avoidance, they try very, very hard to shut down their feelings, to disconnect them. So what happens is that they will see this interplay. And this is just one example out of many of how they can become triggered. They can see that there is a tone shift whenever their partner starts saying somebody's name. And they start to observe their partner and they see that their partner is nervous around that other person. And they start to observe more and they see that they also smile a lot. They do bids for their attention more than perhaps anybody else in the group. So they start having some reactions. If they've made it this far into the relationship and they are speaking about their experiences, might even confront their partner. But because many fearful avoidants, due to the heightened state of arousal that they naturally have very often from their troubled upbringings, there's a sort of hypervigilance that is gifted to them. So as a result, they can actually observe social situations from a different observational position than most people who never had to worry about their safety or their survival, or whether or not their caregivers were being honest or manipulating them, or were going to lash out at them, unfairly so, or abandon them. And so they might read this, but because they're hyper in tune, they could be early to picking up on some of these signals. So when they try to confront their partner thinks that there's nothing to be worried about. They might even actually be convinced of this. Again, this is one example out of many. And so what happens is this creates this self-perpetuating cycle where then the fearful avoidant hides even more because they feel crazy, or they feel that they've jumped the gun, or that they're too sensitive. So it's confirming this fear that, again, they're too much, especially if this is paired with any sort of hysterics or stalking or any sort of extreme behavior that can be common with fearful avoidance. Not all fearful avoidants verge into this territory, but we're talking about shadow patterns, and it's fair to say that those that do struggle with fearful avoidance or high degree of anxious attachment, dismissive avoidance, I don't often see this because they're from the get-go not very attached. In fact, some of the dismissive avoidants that I speak to in my client work have never really been attached, ever. And as a result, they live through their relationships through the mind and through the body and through their obligations and their commitments. And that's how they feel love, is they decide to show up. And even then, their emotional responses get the best of them, and they often don't show up. But they stay committed from afar, and sometimes in another city or another room of the house, or etc. And so usually those that go to the more extreme behaviors have a high degree of anxiety and hypervigilance. So you can also see this with anxious attachment too. And they too like to hide their true feelings and how much they ruminate on their fears that they're losing their partner. And so they can present as being a very dutiful, connected spouse, boyfriend, girlfriend, or love interest. And they can reflect back exactly what you want and what you desire because they love making their partners happy. So they can really go above and beyond. Really. But they often hide a big part of themselves. And you don't know it until they're confronting you with sometimes some rather big emotions or punishing tactics. So as a result, the relationship is kind of an illusion for a large part of being with an anxious attachment. Not all the time. Again, it manifests differently depending on the person and their unique combination of wounds and triggers. But many people are surprised when they actually learn the truth of what the anxious, avoidant partner is thinking and feeling, and how much sometimes they don't like to do the things that they do just to please you. Because they're that afraid of losing you. So they mold themselves to be this perfect partner, trying to convince themselves that they do like that restaurant, that they do like traveling that much, that they do like doing that service thing for you that much, that they do like that thing in the bedroom. You thought you found your perfect match. They matched you perfectly in your desires, like they just fell out from heaven. Or they could be anxiously or fearfully attached. Shadow love is rooted in fear, fear of being seen, fear of being authentic, and a fear of love. If you want to learn more about your shadow love patterns, I encourage you to check out my True Love Masterminds group. You can work at your own pace and you can ask questions there and let me follow your journey for the long term, or just for a month. You can cancel anytime. Some people just pop in and they leave, others stay. I also have a TikTok channel dedicated to these topics, and you can find the links for both of these in the description box.